So who is the best pound for pound? Who truly deserves the crown of boxing's pound for pound king? Terence Crawford's dominance? Usyk's historic heavyweight feats? And of course you have Dmitry Bivol's technical brilliance, and they all make compelling cases. Fans and pundits, they remain divided because each fighter is boasting unmatched skills and legacy-defining victories. So as the debate heats up, the question lingers. Who really stands atop of the sport as the best of the best? So we're just going to talk about pound for pound, who is the best. And we'll look at a traditional list. But before we start start mentioning names, I think there's an important question to ask. And that is, what is the criteria for scoring someone as pound for pound the best? How does someone get into the top 10? What's the criteria? And from what I've seen, there is a bit of a criteria, which is number one is skill level. Number two is achievements. Number three is resume strength. Resume strength and achievements are quite similar. And then there's dominance, and then there's intangibles. Now, I would further add to that cultural impact, because I think cultural impact is really important. So let's take a previous fighter and let's see how they do with regards to this resume. So if you take someone like Manny Pacquiao, high skill level, great speed, great footwork, different angles. With regards to achievements and resume strength, you have victories over Oscar De La Hoya, who is a modern day great. You have victories over Ricky Hatton, who is a champion. You have a tremendous victory over Miguel Cotto, again, who is a champion. And you just have a variety of different champions on his CV. And he's won belts, I believe, in different weight divisions. So when you look at the achievements and resumes of Manny Pacquiao, you can definitely see that it's up there, it's high. When we get to dominance, if you look at the the three performances against Miguel Cotto, the performance against Ricky Hatton, and the performance against Oscar De La Hoya, you can see that there was significant dominance. The performance against Miguel Cotto, I thought, was absolutely sensational. I felt like Miguel Cotto came in very motivated and, of course, is a great fighter. And Manny Pacquiao just went to a different level. Against Ricky Hatton. Ricky Hatton was a pressure fighter, a very good pressure fighter with a good left hook. He would go to the right and then hit you with that left hook to the body. And he would just constantly give pressure. And that knockout victory against Ricky Hatton, who has a good chin, who had great punch resistance at the time, was just chilling. It was brutal. It was a true symbol of dominance. And the Oscar De La Hoya fight, now, of course, the Oscar De La Hoya fight, there's some variables there because clearly he didn't come in the best shape, but that's not Manny Pacquiao's fault. He was at the end of his career, but Manny Pacquiao clearly dominated that fight. And again, these are all reference points. These are all evidence of a fighter that ticks all of those boxes. So let's go into this. So on most people's list, number one is Usyk. That's understandable. He's got an elite skill level. The main thing about Usyk is being able to solve the problems that are put in front of him. He's able to adapt. His adaptation skills are very good. This is referenced in the second Anthony Joshua fight when Anthony Joshua brought a better game plan and he looked like he had Usyk in trouble in round 9. Usyk made the adjustments, and in round 10, he went to what I called matrix level. And, he just excelled. And I think that just illustrates that Usyk has great boxing IQ. Again, against Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury had a great 5th round and a great 6th round. But then in round 9, Usyk hit him with that counter left hook, or that counter left. And that set up a barrage of punches where he nearly knocked Tyson Fury out, but he won a decision, and then he won the rematch against a fighter, Tyson Fury, who is considered one of the greats and is considered a fighter that has high IQ. So you can see there that Usyk has the achievements, he has the resume. Also, additionally to that, he has a spectacular cruiserweight resume because he was the undisputed cruiserweight champion. So he has that resume of being undisputed cruiserweight champion and undisputed heavyweight champion. And then we have the dominance. We have the dominance of the cruiserweight division and the dominance of the heavyweight division. Also, I would say he has a cultural impact, not only for Ukraine, but also globally. This is reflected in the pay-per-view numbers in the Tyson Fury rematch. So I can understand why people have him as number one. Now at number two, most people have Inoue as their number two. Now Inoue has total dominance. He has a great skill level first. He has good punching creativity. He hits you with the 3 left hooks in a row. Remember, he throws like a double jab, right hook to the head, left hook to the body, left hook to the head. Let's do that again. Double jab, right hook to the head, left hook to the body, left hook to the head. Really great punch creativity, good ring generalship, great footwork. I remember someone compared him to like Bruce Lee, and he has a total dominance. The unfortunate thing about Inoue is that he hasn't had, from what I've seen, that dancing partner. And most great fighters have a dancing partner. I always give the reference to Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali had some great dancing partners, whether it was Sonny Liston, because Sonny Liston was a feared heavyweight. So when he beat him, that excelled his career. He had the trilogy with Joe Frazier, which was spectacular events. And then he had that spectacular fight with George Foreman. So in a sense, a fighter excels based on the strength of his opposition. And Inoue is just totally dominated. So from a domination point of view and from a skill set point of view, you've got to put him up there. It's just unfortunate he hasn't had that dance partner. He's had that dominance. In Japan, he has that cultural impact. He's massive in Japan. And fortunately, that seems to be transferring to Britain as well. So Inoue, I think, is definitely a deserved number two. Then we have number three, which is Terence Crawford. Now, I read in the comments and online that Terence Crawford doesn't have a good CV. This is clearly very silly. He has a great CV. That's one of his strengths. He's beaten lots of former champions. Crawford has shown elite boxing IQ. He's dominated. You know, when he fought Errol Spence, before the fight, people said it was 50-50. When he totally dominated Errol Spence, people said that, oh, well, Errol Spence he wasn't the same. He wasn't, he wasn't the fighter he was. But they didn't have that narrative before the fight. The truth of the matter is that the Errol Spence fight was a super fight to determine who is the best. And Terence Crawford just excelled. The uppercut that he hit, the uppercut that he landed on Errol Spence was truly awesome and just showed how meticulous he is with his punch selection. Again, he covers all the aspects: skill level, exceptionally high skill level, achievements resume, and a dominance as well. A true dominance. Apart from his last fight where he stepped up in weight, who was competitive with Terence Crawford, And he seems like, similar to Usyk, he seems to be able to go up the gears. And I think for a long time, when we talk about cultural impact, Terence Crawford has gone under the radar, but now he's starting to get that attention. Fortunately or unfortunately, the outcome of the Canelo fight will probably determine whether he upholds that number 3 position or whether he transcends it. Only time will tell. Number 4, I think a lot of people will put this person at number 3, is Dmitry Bivol. Everyone stopped talking about Dmitry Bivol, but when you look at Dmitry Bivol, he has a great jab, high skill level, high boxing IQ. Reference point, the Canelo fight. Second reference point, the Butterbeer fights. Those 2 fighters are elite fighters, so that means he has a strong resume. Dominance. Bivol has a skill dominance, but he's not a knockout puncher. So his dominance is his ring generalship. It's not a Mike Tyson type of dominance. It's not a George Foreman type of dominance. It's more like a Floyd Mayweather type of dominance, outskilling his opponent. Cultural impact is interesting because it feels that people are not talking about Bivol at the moment. And unfortunately, his tremendous fight against Butterbeef, the rematch, the pay-per-view did not perform strongly. However, he does have a cultural impact because the Butterbeer fights, despite maybe not performing economically as well as many would have expected, he still got a lot of exposure in those fights. And he got a tremendous amount of exposure in the Canelo fight, which he would have been the underdog. And he put on a tremendous performance against Canelo. And he was able to take the power of Canelo, and he was able to outpoint him. And he was obviously Canelo. I felt like Bivol won that fight comfortably, even though obviously Canelo was competitive at times. I felt that Bivol won that comfortably, and I think that he definitely has a great resume. And but the Butterbeer fight, this person was billed as like the light heavyweight Mike Tyson. People did not want to fight Butterbeer, and even when Butterbeer arm punches, apparently they're like bricks in his hands. You know, he just punches so ferociously hard, and he had some ferocious knockouts. It's undeniable that he's a power puncher because of his record. Before Bivol, I believe he had 100% knockout rate. I believe it's either I believe it was 100%. And the way he would just damage opponents with these short little punches. Reference point, Callum Smith, very good fighter, former world champion, and he totally dominated him. And he's had many dominant victories. Yet Bivol went in there, and I think the first fight was very close. I thought Bivol won that fight. But in the second fight, it looked like Butterbeer was going to take over. And then Bivol went into what I call the Matrix mode. He just went to a different place, and Butterbeer couldn't keep up with him. And previously, no one had been able to keep up with Butterbeer. So I feel that performance is so strong that I could understand why a lot of people would be tempted to put him at number 3. Interestingly, if they do have a trilogy with Butterbeer and he wins it in a dominant fashion, I think there's a strong argument there to put him higher on the list. Number 5 is Butterbeer. You know what? I'm surprised about that rank. Initially, before the Bivol fights, you would definitely put him in the top 3 because of the total dominance. But I feel that the Bivol fight, I think a lot of people might have Butterbeer lower than the number 5. And I feel like his rank is still up for grabs, so to speak. And it will be dependent on what happens in the Bivol trilogy. Then we have number 6, which is Jesse Bam Bam Rodriguez, multi-division champion, undisputed flyweight champion, has beaten former champions. So again, we have the skill level, the achievements, the resume, maybe not the cultural impact, which is a category that I've inserted, but definitely based on technical ability and achievements, deserves to be there. Then you've got Jontu Nakatani. Hope I've pronounced that right. Again, a multi-division champion, unbeaten, and has knockout power even at a lower rate. So even though he's at a lower weight, it's very hard to be a power puncher at a lower weight. And again, he's had signature wins. So that's number 7. And number 8, we have Canelo Alvarez. And I feel like Canelo Alvarez has run titles in 4 different divisions. He has a great resume. The Triple G fights, the Triple G trilogy, that really said a lot. The first fight was a draw. A lot of people thought Golovkin won, but in the second fight, not only did he win, I felt like he kind of dominated. It was competitive, but he took the center of the ring, and then he finished the trilogy with a relatively dominant win. So you have to give him a lot of credit for that. He beat Sergey Kovalev, who at one point Sergey Kovalev was just absolutely dominating everyone, and he knocked Sergey Kovalev out. You've got other great fighters on the resume, Miguel Cotto, Billy Joe Saunders was a good fighter, a good champion, Callum Smith, etc. I understand why he's number 8. He definitely could jump up if he has a victory against Terence Crawford. It would depend on the manner of that victory. Would I put him in number 8? I don't. It's a hard one, isn't it? Like, I felt like his last performance was not great. Didn't like his last performance. And I guess one of the things when you're ranking pound for pound, does your latest performance, does that impact where you stand? And you would think the answer to that would be yes. And that last performance was just not inspiring at all. But you know, all the greats always have a bad night. So um, Canelo Alvarez is obviously an elite fighter. Obviously, pound for pound, you can understand why he's in the top 10. But he hasn't been in the best form recently. And I think his next fight will kind of determine where he sits at that top 10. Then you got number 9, Shakur Stevenson. He hasn't got the power, but he's similar to the Floyd Mayweather situation: elite defense, elite footwork, and elite counter punching. And he has dominance, not a Mike Tyson type of dominance, but again, like a Floyd Mayweather type of dominance. It's his ring generalship that really excels him. And then you got David Benavidez, which is a controversial one. He's a multi-WBC champion. He's unbeaten, and he's a dominant fighter. He loves loading up with those left hooks. So actually throws them, that's pretty unfair because he throws those short left hooks. He puts loads of pressure, effective pressure, and he's unbeaten. And he's currently a dominant fighter. I think you might be able to question the resume. He has good achievements, but there's a difference between having good achievement and elite level achievement. So he doesn't have the resume of a Usyk or a Terence Crawford. So I think a lot of people may not have him in the top 10, but I can definitely understand that. Again, there would be questions. I saw a video recently where people were saying, who would you put as number 11? Who would you put as number 12? Again, I think Jay Opataya, he's definitely up there. He's on a really good run. Unbeaten, southpaw, has speed, has power. But yeah, I feel like that pound for pound list is really strong. And I think there's going to be some significant movement, particularly with the Terence Crawford fight. And the Terence Crawford and Canelo fight, I think, will determine where they will be in the top 10. And also the Bivol and Butterbeer trilogy, if that happens, that again will determine where they will both sit in the top 10. So, but I definitely agree that Usyk, it's Inoue or Usyk that should sit at number 1. And Usyk has had phenomenal performances, probably at the end of his career. But he's had such a dominant, he's been dominant at the heavyweight division. And in his last fight, it's like he's introducing this new version of Usyk, which is now a power puncher. So I'm really intrigued to see who he fights next and how he performs. Anthony Joshua, one last shot at glory. Anthony Joshua stands at the crossroads of his legendary career, with one final chance to reclaim the glory that once made him the face of heavyweight boxing. But after setbacks and redemption arcs, the question remains, does AJ still have the fire to conquer the division? Or will this be his last stand in the pursuit of greatness? I remember the beginning of Anthony Joshua's career. I remember when he fought, what was it, Kevin Johnson. That was a blistering knockout. He just was full of confidence, full of aggression. And then I remember the fight against Dillian White, and that was a good fight because he was hurt in the second round, but he came back, he showed character, and he finished the job. And then I remember when he got his first title against Charles Martin, and Charles Martin was a southpaw, and it seemed like it could be a tricky assignment, but he just knocked him out with great timing. And then you had the Klitschko fight, and this was a dangerous affair because Klitschko, he had experience, he had speed, he had power, and I remember when Anthony Joshua knocked Klitschko down, I think in round 5, he was just that youthful power and speed, and, he was just on it. And then Klitschko weathered the storm and then scored that knockdown in round 6. And then logic would say that Klitschko would have the experience and would implement the experience as he did, just to control the distance, control the fight, and then probably knock Joshua out. But in round 11, Joshua rolled the dice. He rolled the dice and he got the knockout. And it's got to be said that Robert McCracken, who was his trainer at the time, did a fantastic job. And then we had the Andy Ruiz fight, and it all seemed to just go downhill. I kind of remember that fight where Anthony Joshua seemed to be doing a lot of American press, and it looked like there was going to be the transition from Anthony Joshua, obviously he's massive in Britain, but then transitioning over to America. I assume he's big in America also, but there was like a conscious effort. And I think he was on The Breakfast Club, and he went into that fight, and Andy Ruiz had an impressive resume. I mean, he had a good fight, a good competitive fight with Joseph Parker. And there was also footage where the great Evander Holyfield, spoke about Andy Ruiz getting the better of him in sparring. Andy Ruiz had built a good resume, and it kind of looked like that maybe they just overlooked that. Maybe they thought Andy Ruiz wouldn't be in shape or whatever. And it was a difficult one because I think Anthony Joshua was scheduled to fight Gerald Miller, but then that fight was cancelled. And I remember Anthony Joshua began the fight. He was controlling it behind a jab. He got the knockdown in round 3, went in to finish it. And the one thing Ruiz is, he's a quick counterpuncher. He's got slow feet, but he's a quick counterpuncher. Ruiz was able to be stoic, held his composure through those counterpunches, and then Anthony Joshua was in real bad trouble. And in fairness, Anthony Joshua got up. He took loads of punches. He tried to weather the storm. He showed that he had heart. He showed that he had character, similar to the Klitschko fight. But Andy Ruiz was really on it that night and scored a blistering 7th round knockout. And, that was obviously a hard defeat to swallow. But in fairness to Anthony Joshua, he showed character. He came back. Andy Ruiz, allegedly, I don't even think it's allegedly, because he didn't seem to come in good. He didn't seem to come in good shape visibly, or in good fighting shape. Because there's, as I've stated before, there's looking in good shape and then there's being in fighting shape, and it looked like Anthony Ruiz was in neither. And Anthony Joshua came back, fought a smart game plan, utilized the jab, utilized the ring, nullified Andy Ruiz's punch opportunities, and became a 2-time world champion. Big respect to him. And then he fought Usyk, and obviously Usyk has gone on to be a legend, a great. But the jury was still out on Usyk, and Usyk had a tremendous performance against Joshua. The fight was competitive up to a point, but then Usyk just took over, if I remember, in the last quarter of the fight, and dominated at the end, nearly knocking Anthony Joshua out in the 12th round. And then in the rematch, Anthony Joshua brought in some new trainers, had a new game plan, invested in more body work, threw short punches on the inside, was more aggressive. And it appeared after round 9 that Anthony Joshua was going to be the one taking over. And then Usyk it's like he just entered the matrix and then just blitzed Anthony Joshua. And it was a very good performance by Anthony Joshua. He made amendments. He came back with a better strategy and even more determined and even more passion. But Usyk just went up the gears. We didn't know that Usyk had more gears, and he just improved exponentially. And then from there, he made a comeback. He had a sensational performance against Ngannou, real sensational performance. And let's not forget that when Ngannou fought Tyson Fury, a lot of people thought that Ngannou was not only competitive, but some people thought that he won. So when Anthony Joshua engaged in that fight, there was a lot of questions. And Anthony Joshua came in like he was like Sonny Liston. He just came in and totally obliterated, respectively, Ngannou. So you kind of felt like, okay, Anthony Joshua is back. He's back. He's got his confidence back. And then we had the Daniel Dubois situation where he got caught in round one with an overhand right. And then, that night, Daniel Dubois was, let's be honest, he was sensational. He came to bring it. He came to win. He was focused. He was very confident. And it was a good fight. And in round 5, I think Anthony Joshua hurt him and then went in with an uppercut. And then Daniel Dubois just threw that counter right hand and the fight was over. And now we're in a point where there's the rumor of the comeback, but we don't know who the opponent is. And then I saw an Eddie Hearn interview where they said he's going to roll the dice next year. So looking at the Anthony Joshua outfit, he currently has Ben Davidson as a trainer. I've always said Ben Davidson is a high-level trainer. He's worked with Billy Joe Saunders, good fighter, champion. Worked with Tyson Fury, one of the best fighters of this generation, just behind Usyk. And he's working with Moses Atama, who could be potentially the new heavyweight star. Only time will tell. So Ben Davidson is a high-level trainer. He's definitely a high-level trainer. And from my understanding, Ben Davidson's philosophy is not to change your boxing style, but it's just to harness it further. So he kind of adds on your strengths and he emphasizes on power, timing, and precision. And if you look, Anthony Joshua has developed a really nice pull counter, which was evident against Ngannou. Also, Ben Davidson studies opponents meticulously. He often says he does scouting reports. So I think Ben Davidson is definitely a credible, very credible trainer. And also there's a credible environment because you think in that environment you have, Moses Atama, I believe. Is Ben Davidson still training Fabio Wardley? Is he still involved with him? So you got these young lions and that energy is important. It's important when you're in a camp and you've got other upcoming heavyweights. That means good quality sparring, but the energy, it can raise your game. So I believe he's in the right environment. But then the question becomes, who should Anthony Joshua fight next? And I think there's been 4 potential people that have been mentioned. Tony Yoko is one. Martin Bakole is the second one. Jake Paul is the third one. And Deontay Wilder is the 4th one. Now, I think Tony Yoka, a lot of people don't like that fight. But I think that's a good fight for him because it's about building his confidence. Tony Yoka is a decent fighter, but from my understanding, he's not a power puncher. And this could be a fight where he can get rounds in and build his confidence. So I don't think that's a bad fight. I don't think it's a fight you can sell to the public, but it's definitely a fight where he can get rounds in, build his confidence. And if he can knock Tony Yoka out, that's brilliant. Martin Bakole, I think, is potentially a dangerous fight because Martin Bakole has a lot of potential. He has a lot of potential. I think if you look at the reference point as Joseph Parker, I think that reference point is not a good one because he only had 24 hours to prepare and he was clearly not in fitness shape and also not in boxing shape. He wasn't in fitness shape and he wasn't in boxing shape. So that wouldn't be the good analogy. A better analogy would be what he did against Jared Anderson. He absolutely destroyed Jared Anderson. Good fighter. So I think that's too dangerous for a fight to take right now, even though that could be a big fight. And I think they were rumored to be putting that fight on in Africa. I don't really like the Jake Paul fight. No disrespect to Jake Paul. I think Jake Paul has done some good things for boxing, particularly for female boxing. He's raised the profile for female boxing. But realistically, that is a different type of event. So I think a lot of boxing purists don't like that fight. And then we have the Deontay Wilder fight. And Deontay Wilder has looked pretty bad recently. And I think initially a lot of people thought that Anthony Joshua would lose to Deontay Wilder. And he may lose to Deontay Wilder, but I think a lot of people now would think that, yeah, Anthony Joshua would definitely win that fight. And because of the CV and the marketability of Deontay Wilder, which was generated through his early knockouts and through his trilogy with Tyson Fury, which got so much attention, he is a household name. And in terms of monetary value, in terms of how much, the fight would generate, that again would be potentially a spectacular fight. And if he was to win that fight, that would really put him back into, that would put him right back into the scene, so to speak. So I think there's some interesting, I think the Tony Yoka is good to build the confidence. I think the Martin Bakole, that's dangerous. That's a dangerous fight. And if he did beat Martin Bakole, I don't think he would get the credit because of the current perception of Martin Bakole, which is unfair. And I think the Deontay Wilder fight, even though it's not the fight that it would have been in terms of the marketability, because they both have power, and some say Deontay Wilder hits as hard as George Foreman, hits as hard as Ernie Shavers. I think that fight is the one that really captures the public's imagination. So Terence Crawford has a physique that has the fans talking because his shredded physique has set social media ablaze, with fans buzzing about his power, discipline, and the looming mega fight against Canelo Alvarez. Every photo fuels speculation that Crawford is gearing up for the biggest challenge of his career. Could this new look be the edge he needs to shock the world in this historic showdown? You know what's funny? I've noticed online that people are questioning Terence Crawford's resume. And it's just mind-boggling. I mean, let's go through it. So when he fought Errol Spence, before he fought Errol Spence, this was a 50-50 fight. But when he dominated and respectively destroyed Errol Spence was damaged goods. So why did people not create this narrative beforehand? Why was it a 50-50 fight before, but now Spence was damaged goods afterwards? Like, make it make sense. And then we have the fight against Julius Indongo, which made him the undisputed super lightweight champion. Then we had the Gamboa fight, which showcased his elite boxing IQ. And then we had the Victor Postol fight, which was a masterful decision to unify the titles at 140. And then, of course, we had the Sean Porter fight. And Sean Porter was a fighter that was a really good champion, fought at the elite level. He brought everything to the table. And again, Terence just went to that matrix level. Again, in hindsight, Sean Porter wasn't a credible opponent, according to some people. That is patently ludicrous. Why were people not saying this beforehand? Sean Porter was, like I said, he was a good champion, and he brought intensity and passion and aggression. And like I said, Terence Crawford just took it to another level. And then we had the fight against Jeff Horn, which was when I think he moved up in weight. And again, that was a one-sided beatdown. He totally dominated the fight against Jeff Horn, respectively. So when you look at the CV of Terence Bud Crawford, you see credible opponents that have been beaten in meticulous fashion. How could you say that this is not a good CV? And if it isn't a good CV, then please show me what is a good CV. I mean, just make it make sense. It really doesn't make any sense at all. So one of the strong points of Terence Crawford is that he has such notable victories. However, there's been a picture circulating, and there's been a lot of speculation. There's been a lot of speculation with regards to his weight gain. And the positive speculation has ironically come from Sean Porter. And what he says is that he feels that Crawford's preparation has been really good. He feels that it's been really good. And he is saying that he's gaining weight the correct way, with expert guidance, facing bigger sparring partners. And obviously, why is he getting bigger sparring partners? They are there to simulate the strength and the power of Canelo. So there you have the praise from Sean Porter. But then you have some negative feedback where certain fans are criticizing him for not adding enough mass, suggesting that he looks too lean for Canelo. And Abel Sanchez is, again, really good trainer. He's currently training Filip Hrgović. He's revitalized Filip Hrgovic's career, adding different elements to his game. And he also trained Triple G when Triple G completely took over the division, had monstrous power, and was very feared. So Abel Sanchez has had some criticism, stating that he feels that quickly bulking up instead of gradually building muscle, this could backfire. This is interesting because a lot of casual people would assume if you're lean, you're in good shape. In one sense, that's true, but you might not be in boxing shape. But here we have a reverse where people are seeing Crawford being lean and assuming that he's not in fighting shape. So I don't know what to make of that. Does that mean that, boxing critics and the boxing media or general fans are more insightful? Or is this harsh criticism of Crawford? Clearly, if you're carrying more weight and you're looking lean, that could indicate something very positive, because if you're putting on too much weight and you're not looking lean, then that could indicate that maybe you're not in the shape that's necessary to be able to compete. Putting on weight can hinder speed. It can typically maximize power and strength, but hinder speed and accuracy. So if he's still able to maintain his leanness, maybe that's a representation that the accuracy and speed are still there. So if his speed was like an 8 out of 10, him moving up means now it's a 7.5 as opposed to being like down to a 6. So it's still a strength. But it does create some interesting speculation. Also, I tried to get some information what's happening in Crawford's camp. It seems to be that there's a lot of secrecy, but from what I hear, there's two main elements to his camp. So the first element is that he's bringing in Shakur Stevenson, and that's for the boxing IQ work, which is very important because Canelo has a high boxing IQ. So you need to bring in someone that can replicate the boxing IQ of Canelo. So that's Shakur Stevenson's job. However, you have not only a boxing IQ challenge, you have a strength and power challenge, and he's bringing in larger sparring partners to try and simulate the power and strength that Canelo brings. Ideally, you need a combination of all those things in your sparring partner, so you need them to bring strength, power, and ring IQ. Because we don't have any names, any actual names of who these larger opponents are, it's hard to ascertain or to build an accurate estimation of whether these sparring partners would have the relevant IQ to be able to imitate Canelo. This is where the trainers are so essential, because I guess BOMAC's role isn't just about creating an effective training system. It's also about nurturing the sparring to duplicate, not only to duplicate Canelo's normal routine, but also to try and duplicate new things that he might try. So that's a really important role. So it's not just about having a good training system. It's also about getting sparring partners to duplicate Canelo's boxing IQ. So typically you would want them to, the basic combination, the right uppercut to the head, the left hook to the body. You need to be bringing in guys that can throw that punch effectively. And to make those, the other combination that Canelo likes to throw is the jab to the body and then the right hook to the head, but he throws it with blistering speed. So you need to get fighters that can duplicate that so that, Terence Crawford becomes accustomed to the habits of Canelo. And I guess from the outside looking in, and all of us, apart from the ones in the camp, we're all outsiders looking in. We don't know what's going to happen when Crawford tastes Canelo's power. We don't know if he has the ability to absorb that power. Can he absorb that power for 12 rounds? Will Canelo be able to find a target in the 12 rounds? There we have a reference point, the Floyd Mayweather fight, where he struggled to find the target. And basically, Floyd Mayweather used his boxing intelligence and his experience to nullify Canelo's offense. But obviously, this is a more intelligent Canelo. Then we have the Bivol reference, who outpointed Canelo, but Bivol, being a light heavyweight, naturally had the weight to be able to take Canelo's punches. So the Bivol fight is the reference point, but we don't know if Bud Crawford is built to be able to absorb punches from Canelo. But it's all interesting, and it's just such a massive event. And I love the fact that this event is predicated by their fighting styles as opposed to their personalities. Let's be really honest. Canelo and Terence Crawford have tremendous boxing resumes, and this potentially is going to be a great fight. So Lewis Crocker and Paddy Donovan are set for a rematch. The first fight was a grueling contest. Paddy was dominating, but a punch after the bell made the fight a disqualification. This was an electric night. Now, can Lewis Crocker make adjustments, or can Paddy replicate the previous performance, minus the disqualification? This may be another great night. So there was like two narratives of this fight. The first narrative was that Paddy was dominating. He was dominating the fight. And then the second narrative was that he got disqualified, or that he was fouling, and those foulings led to a disqualification, the final incident being a punch after the bell. So I want to jump straight in and kind of ascertain what each fighter needs to do to win. So this is just simply from my perspective. So I feel like in the fight, one of the issues, when you look at Paddy, the first thing he does, he uses his jab, and he's blurring your vision, and then he's snapping it, and then he's feinting, and he's moving. And he's a southpaw. So I think the first thing that Lewis Crocker needs to try and do is get his hand moving, try and, tap the shoulder, try to nullify his right jab, Paddy's right jab, and try and jab the shoulder if possible. Try and jab the bicep, and, try and blur his vision the same way that he blurred your vision. So try and blur the vision, try and control the shoulder. Obviously throw the jab to the head, throw it to the chest, but sometimes throw it to the bicep, to the arm. Because as the fight progresses, if his arm is hurting significantly bad, or if he's damaged his arm, he's less likely to use the jab. So it will affect his jab output. And Paddy, the jab is a major part of his arsenal. So I think that's the first thing he needs to do. And while he's doing that, so it's feint, it's parries, it's trying to control the shoulder, it's jabbing the head, but also jabbing the arm, jabbing the chest. I think there needs to be a variation on his jab, and he needs to enter the battle of the jabs. He may not win the battle of the jabs, but he needs to enter the battle of the jabs. And also another thing that was interesting in the fight is that when I was observing the fight, I noticed that Paddy would put his head on, I'm assuming he was trying to put his head on Lewis's chest. So I'm assuming he was trying to put his head on Lewis's chest, but he would put his head forward and then their heads would clash. So I don't think this was intentional. I think it's when you put your head on the opponent's chest, and you kind of create a limited target. Now, there's a few ways that Crocker can deal with this. He can either step to the side or he could pivot. So if you come in like that and you just simply step to the side, then that nullifies the head damage, the potential head damage, and it creates a new angle. Alternatively, you can walk him into a punch, because it's the motion of going from here to here. You can time an opponent into a shot. So I feel that this whole thing about the use of the head, and let's assume it was unintentional, that can be used against Paddy. And also, I feel that what he needs to do is that when Paddy has this thing, and it's a good thing, he'll throw punches quickly. He can either throw punches hard or he can throw them short. Lennox Lewis used to do the same thing. And I think that when he's throwing clusters of punches, I feel that Lewis Crocker needs to interrupt those cluster of punches. And one of the best ways to do it is to go to the body and then to the head. So it could be like the straight right to the body and then the left hook to the head, or the left hook to the head and the straight right to the body. But he really needs to interrupt Paddy's rhythm. Another thing is that Paddy's stepping a lot to the right. He's stepping a lot to the right. So when he's stepping to the right, there's a few things he can do here. He can throw the left hook, or he can feint with the left hook and then, introduce the right hand, or, feint with the left hook, throw the right hand, left hook, right hand, etc. But he does need to try and capitalize on that when he's moving to the right. Now, if he can't get the hard left hook off, then get the feint off, because the feint can be used to set up different phases. And I think that's really important, because you want to take that away from him. You don't want him to be confident, to be just moving to the right all the time, or to be dipping to the right and to, feel confident doing that. And also in round 8, there's a reference point where Lewis Crocker lands a counter left hook, and it was a very hard punch. And I think he needs to do more of that. Obviously you've got to set it up, but he needs to do more of that. And ultimately, I think Crocker needs more punch creativity. He needs more punch creativity. And, so we need head, body, head. If you're going to try and set up the overhand right, just don't throw the overhand right, because Paddy's going to see it. Set it up with jabs to the chest, jabs to the shoulder, and then throw the overhand right, or throw some feints. You've got to give him different looks, You can't just open the door. You have to really show some variation and show some boxing intelligence to be able to nullify Paddy and to be able to hit him. Because Paddy's using movement. He's moving his head, he's moving his legs, he's an evasive target. So you really need some creativity to be able to penetrate that. And I think taking the center of the ring is important as well, to dictate. As Paddy's moving, you can take the center of the ring and only retreat if you're trying to set Paddy up for a trap. And a lot of fighters will do this. They'll, step back to try and walk you into some punches. But generally speaking, I think taking the center of the ring. So what does Paddy need to do to win? Well, Paddy needs to keep utilizing that jab. He busted Lewis Crocker's, was it his left eye? So if he's busting your left eye, the right jab's coming from here. So he needs to, again, do the same thing. Blur the vision, parry, feint, then shoot it, and keep that going. The counter left he used a lot if Lewis Crocker stepped in crudely, he would throw the counter left. Sometimes he would throw the lead left. So I think that works. I think also the short punches are really good. I think the short punches, shortening up the punches, because it potentially could be a long night. So you want to make sure that you reserve stuff in the gas tank. If you do go to the body, probably set it up with the right hook first and then the left hook to the body. And just, use your movement. And with the jab, of course, you need to vary it, but aim for that eye. Because he hasn't, how long ago was the fight? But it can reopen. So he should be aiming for the eye. I think a 2-3 because that's, yeah, from the southpaw position. I think the straight left and the right hook would be a good combination to use. And I think he should do what he did. Effectively, he would use movement, and then Lewis Crocker would come towards him. He would punch at the target, and then he would spin out. And I think he should just reiterate those tactics. So I think what we have here is that Lewis Crocker needs to change nearly everything, but Paddy just needs to show discipline. So Lewis Crocker needs to change everything, but Paddy needs to show some discipline. And it looks like that whole thing of when he puts the head on the shoulder, that's something that he's probably been taught. And the way Lewis Crocker moves, it just, they just clash heads. So they need to be learning to unlearn that habit for this fight, because if this does happen again, then there's a strong possibility that there could be a disqualification. So it's a difficult one, because when you're on the inside, you need to get a lower sense of gravity, and you don't want to stand up straight to become a bigger target. But at the same time, he has to be aware that, if the referee starts putting pressure on him, that could affect his offense, that could affect his defense, and it can affect his mind state. So I think in the camp, particularly with Paddy, it's about staying composed and trying to nullify that particular habit. And that might be actually difficult. And that was a variable of the fight that you couldn't really predict that was going to happen. But that's something that they need to get creative with. Now, if Lewis Crocker's stepping to the side when he's doing it, then he'll have a different problem. So he won't have a problem with the heads clashing, but he'll have a problem where Lewis Crocker's creating different angles and openings for punches. But Paddy's composure is really important here. It's so important because, like I said, he was clearly winning the fight, but yet he landed a punch after the bell. So he needs to really maintain his composure and just be aware of everything. Like hearing the bell sounds, but because you're in the moment, you let off punches after the bell and knocking someone out. You need to be taking in everything. You need to be so aware. So the one thing that Paddy needs to work on, he wants to replicate the dominance. However, he needs to deal with the head issue, because that could increase the chances of the fight being stopped. And I don't know, maybe they need to do some drill with regards to ensuring that he hears that, that bell at the end of the round, to ensure that he doesn't throw any punches after the bell, because that cost him the fight last time. I think another crucial part of this fight will be the trainers. So you got Andy Lee. Andy Lee is like the hottest trainer in Britain right now. I mean, he's got a stable of some really good fighters. Off the top of the head, I can think of Joseph Parker. And Joseph Parker, I believe, is the number one contender for Usyk, and he's had a sequence of great performances. He's totally revitalized Joseph Parker's career, and he's really added to him as a fighter. And who else has he got? He's got Shiraz, and Shiraz has looked really good. He had a total domination of was it Edgar Berlanga? Apologies if I mispronounced that. And he has Ben Whittaker, and Ben Whittaker again had another great performance. So he's got a fighting environment where you've got fighters with a lot of passion, with a lot of energy, with a lot of commitment, and that's a really good fighting environment. And then you got Billy Nelson again, who's a respected trainer. He's probably, well, I know him for the Martin Bakole work. So you got Martin Bakole, but you got some other fighters in that stable. So that will be a lively environment. But the point here is that I think the strategies leading into this fight and who they pick as sparring partners and the strategies that they put together are going to be so important for the outcome of this fight, but also ensuring that the communication is not just good pre-fight in terms of determining what the plan is and communicating that effectively to the fighter, but also in between rounds to ensure that the fighters are following instructions. Andy Lee, I think, is a really excellent communicator pre-fight and in between rounds. But this will be a really good test. And I think the magnitude of the fight, when I rewatched it, what kind of shocked me was how big this fight is in Ireland. It was huge. You could really feel the atmosphere. And when I watched it on my big TV, you could feel that, yeah, these warriors, they're highly loved by the Irish public, and they really came out to support them, and that's a great thing. Now, with regards to the outcome, I think looking at it objectively, you would give Paddy an edge, but there's pressure on Paddy. There's pressure for him to duplicate the performance, but there's also pressure with regards to him not duplicating the fouls. This kind of reminds me, and hopefully this doesn't happen to him, of the Andrew Golotto Riddick Bowe situation, where Andrew Golotto, I think he lost the first fight due to fouls, but he was dominating the fight. But then he lost the second fight due to fouling. So this is going to be a real good test of his temperament and a real good test of his character. But I think even with those barriers, because you could argue there's not as much pressure on Lewis Crocker, you would make him the favorite. You would definitely make him the favorite in this fight. It's looking like a 60-40, maybe 65-35 in Paddy's favor. But the last one, the atmosphere was so huge, and both guys will be making amendments. Both guys will be coming in to put it all on the line, and it should be a great fight. So is Misfits boxing helping or ruining real boxing? Misfits boxing has exploded onto the scene, blending influencers, entertainers, and athletes in the squared circle. While it pulls in millions of views and attracts a younger audience, critics argue that it undermines the sport's traditions and professional standards. Is this the new way of expanding boxing's reach, or is it slowly damaging the legacy of real boxing? And this is a very controversial topic. I think there's some important questions to ask here. So for me, there would be, where does Misfits boxing fit within boxing ability, or what is the boxing ability of Misfits boxers? Where does it fit within entertainment? And is the revenue model of Misfits boxing, is it profitable? So when you look at the faces of Misfits boxing, because there are faces of Misfits boxing, you have KSI, he's the big star. You have Salt Pappy, and he's respected for his boxing skills. You got Slim, who's been one of the breakout stars. You got Deji, who's KSI's brother and is popular on the YouTube scene. And then, of course, you got Ason Gibb, who's another popular YouTuber who has a level of respect as well. So one of the questions is, where does Misfit boxing fit within boxing ability? And when we talk about boxing ability, I guess there's different levels to boxing. There's different levels. So you could have pre-British title level, British title level, European title level, world contender, world champion, and then obviously you excel into being great. Now, clearly, you could argue that most of Misfits would not even qualify under British title level, if we're being entirely honest. It's hard to qualify that statement, but we would assume that it wouldn't qualify under those conditions in terms of ability and technical ability. However, there is a disparity if you look at Misfits 1 and if you look at the Misfits 22 that happened the other day. There is a disparity. For example, when you looked at Deji versus Fauzi, that was a fight where Deji had developed some technique, and he clearly developed some boxing technique. But Fauzi clearly, he looked in great shape, but he clearly wasn't in boxing shape. He was just, aesthetically looked beautiful, but he didn't have the skill set to, it was a total mismatch. And that kind of was like the problem with misfits, where you might have one person that's, that's decent, and then someone who just is not very good, and then you have a complete mismatch. Another example was Salt Pappy versus Andy Warski. Salt Pappy just scored a knockout within like the first 20 seconds. So you had that disparity in terms of skill level. So there was a matchmaking problem, one could argue, within the Misfits. But then in Misfits 22, we fast forward, I would say that there's been some improvements in this area. So when you had like Ty Mitchell versus Sean Hemphill, I believe it was, you had two fighters that are good boxers. You know, Ty Mitchell um, was the sparring partner for Tony Bellew, who's a former world champion. So we can see that the level has gone up considerably. And Sean is a respectable boxer as well. So this is where we're upping the levels considerably, which is a good thing with regards to credibility. And even the Salt Pappy versus Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson is I believe a former UFC champion. And Salt Pappy has developed his left hand. He's developed his left hand counter, developed his speed, developed his boxing IQ, which needs to be further developed, as was demonstrated in the fight. But again, this was a good competitive fight for as long as it lasted. And even if you look at Chase, people are going to really criticize me for this, but Chase Demore, who has looked awful from a technical boxing point of view, Chase Demore in his last fight in Misfits 22 actually showed some really good technical improvements. He was doing the step back. He saw the right hand. He was stepping to his right. He avoided the puzzle that was put in front of him, which, there was, it was like a double jab right hand. He was constantly trying that overhand right, but Chase Demore was able to nullify that with good defense. He wouldn't have been able to do that before because he was just so crude. Even though you can see that he has tremendous athletic attributes, he was just, from a technical point of view, very crude. So he's evolved his style. So I would say that there's significant improvements within Misfits, and they're trying to actually bring professional fighters in, particularly former UFC fighters, and that improves the skill level. So where does it fit on the skill level? Is it British title, European title? I'm not sure. I think that's hard to qualify, but we can definitely say that the skill level is rising, which is a good thing. I think that's a good thing for credibility. But where does Misfits fit? Where does it fit with regards to entertainment? And I will say this, Misfits is very entertaining. It's extremely entertaining. Again, on that last card, that Joey Essex versus Nimuro, was it? Essex won his boxing debut over 4 rounds, but that was a tremendously epic battle. Again, you can criticize the skill level, of course, but it was a tremendously brutal event, a brutal fight. They both hurt one another, and they put it all on the line, and you got to respect it. Do you know what I'm saying? They both bared their souls. Now, of course, you could say that the technical level, let's say if the technical level was like a 3, but the passion was like a 9 or a 10. They both just fought with such intensity and brought resilience and character. And that, I think, is helpful to the credibility, but it also brings an element of entertainment. Remember, being a great technical boxer is not necessarily entertaining for the casual fans. And Misfits brings entertainment. Remember, Misfits now has a combination of things. It has YouTubers, it has former UFC fighters, and some boxers. YouTubers understand generally the power of marketing. They understand how to market an event. So they bring that marketing ability to these events. And these fights are spectacles outside the ring, but they're also spectacles in the ring. And I think there's been plenty of fights that really have some tremendous entertainment. They may not be good for credibility reasons, but in terms of entertainment, it's up there. And remember, boxing for the purists, like us, we're purists, we see it as a sweet science, but it's also fundamentally entertainment. And I guess the question would be then, how could Misfits build credibility? Or can it build credibility? Should it build credibility? Should it just have its own identity of, this is just entertainment, we're not trying to be more credible? That's an interesting question. But if they are trying to build credibility, I think getting in respectable professionals is a good start. If you can bring in respectable trainers into this arena, then that hires the credibility. Even having people like Conor Benn and Carl Froch, who both attended, even that adds the credibility. The fact that a former champion and a fighter who is very well recognized and respected for his ability would attend this type of event gives it credibility. Also, I even think bringing in former UFC fighters, particularly either champions or former title contenders, brings credibility because, yes, UFC is a different sport, but UFC, a part of UFC is striking. And if you have great strikers or good strikers, then they're more likely to be able to make an effective transition, and they bring credibility because they are fighters. So, and I guess it's what is the motivations of Misfits? Clearly, in a capitalist society, there are economic motivations, but are there motivations of credibility? I think KSI, in terms of the way he's tried to put himself out there as a boxer, has tried to build credibility by putting himself in very professional environments. And I think his fight against Tommy Fury, even though that he lost some would say a controversial decision, the fact that he took on a pro fighter was definitely an attempt to raise not only his credibility as a boxer, but also the platform of Misfits as well. But one of the important questions with regards to Misfits is, what is the revenue model? And this is perhaps where it excels, because you can argue that Misfits creates a new platform. It creates a new platform for different types of fighters. So it specifically creates a platform for YouTubers that want a taste of boxing, that want to make money from boxing, or that want to box. It creates a platform for former UFC contenders or former UFC champions who are not good enough to go back to the UFC. Maybe they're in their late 30s or early 40s, etc., but they still want to they still got that competitive edge, and they still want to, go out there and engage in combat. This again is a great economic opportunity for them. But how does it make money? And that was an important thing that I was looking into. And there's various ways that Misfits make money. The obvious way is the pay-per-view. And they also have a streaming partnership with DAZN that pays for content rights. So that's two different forms of monetization. We then got the sponsorship and advertising. On top of that, you have the ticket sales. Then you have the merchandising, and I believe they have clothing and exclusive gear. And then you have, and this is again, where YouTubers excel, because effectively Misfits is run by YouTubers. You have the social media content, and there's various forms of monetization, not just Google AdSense, but there's super chats, there's YouTube subscriptions, and there's exclusive memberships. So that's another form of monetization. And then you look at the question could be, okay, but how profitable is it? Well, if we look at the pay-per-view, I believe the Prime card had 1.3 million pay-per-view buys, which creates a revenue of 26 million, around 26 million. I believe that's in dollars. So clearly, Misfits is creating a new economic opportunity for, former UFC fighters, even former boxers, and for YouTubers. So there is this new economic opportunity that's being carved. And I guess there's another question here is, does Misfits lead new people into professional boxing? So is Misfits capturing a new audience? Well, apparently the answer to that is yes. But in watching YouTubers fight, and in watching maybe former professionals fight, and watching former UFC fighters fight, will this then entice them to go look at the elite levels of fighters, the Usyks, the Bivols, the Terence Crawfords, the Canelos, etc. And if it does capture that, even if it's a 1% or a 2% or a 3% capture, if 3% of the people that watch it then refer to quote unquote professional boxing, does that not mean it's a positive thing for boxing? Again, it's not. To ask the question, is Misfits good for boxing? It's not a yes, a no answer. It's an answer that provides a lot of context. I think on one hand, Misfits provides new economic opportunities. However, on another hand, it's a significantly lesser level of professional boxing. But then it could be like an entry for a lot of new fans to discover professional boxing or to develop an interest in professional boxing. And then there's the question about the collaborations. Will some boxers cross over? You've got, Jake Paul is fighting Tank Davis. And therefore you've got that transition from the YouTuber boxer fighting a current champion. And you can see the argument for how this can damage boxing, but you can also see the argument that from an economic perspective, this can increase the revenue for boxing exponentially, particularly for boxers that are unable to now participate on a professional level, but are able to feed their families because now they've got this new economic opportunity. And I think this is important. And this is something that I don't know the answer to, but it's important that people are paid fairly, and that, unfortunately in certain sports, it's like the elite, they get like 90% of the money and everyone else gets the crumbs. And hopefully in this new climate of YouTube boxing, it's not just the top that get all the money. Hopefully that's spread out more equally, because that opportunity can be a big thing. That opportunity, like, think of Darren Till. Misfits Boxing has provided Darren Till a great opportunity. He's making, I'm not sure how much money he's making, but I'm pretty sure he's making some good money. Headlining the Misfits 22. So he's been provided another opportunity for exposure, another opportunity to make money, and that can only be a good thing. But I guess one of the important things is that you would hope that when the people are creating the events, that it's not just about the money, it's also about the integrity. So assuming that Misfits has integrity, when it moves forward, we hope that it makes decisions that are not just based on making money, but also based on enabling the integrity of boxing. So what happens if Darren Till fights Carl Froch? What if Darren Till, fresh off showcasing his boxing skills in Misfits, stepped into the ring with Carl Froch, the battle-tested super middleweight legend? Now, Till's unorthodox power punches against Froch's granite chin and relentless pressure would ignite potentially pure chaos. And could Misfits Till shock the Cobra? Or would Froch's championship pedigree dominate? This is a fantasy showdown blurring the line between spectacle and legacy. So who would win? So obviously recently Darren Till was on Misfits, and there's an argument whether Misfits is good for boxing or it's bad for boxing. Then that fight, he had a sensational knockout. There's no doubt about that. And he called out Carl Froch. So I thought the best way to explore this is to look at their resumes. Now, when we look at Carl Froch, you would consider a great champion, a legend, a British legend. So let's look at some of his fights. So one of my favorite Carl Froch fights was against Jean Pascal. It was a 12-round war, and Pascal really brung the pain that night. And it was competitive, But Crawford just had that little bit more seasoning, that little bit more experience, and he won a grueling 12-round decision, and that gave him the WBC title. So that was a significant fight. And then we had the rematch with Kessler. And if people remember, Kessler had a really great battle with Joe Kozagi, And in the and initially Kessler beat Carl Froch. But then in the rematch, Carl Froch was able to overcome adversity and was able to win the rematch. I can't remember if it was a majority or unanimous decision, but what I can remember is that Miguel Kessler, I think he lost the first 3 rounds, but then in the middle of the fight, in the middle rounds, in the 5th and the 6th, he picked up momentum, but then Carl Froch took over in the later part of the fight. And again, this was another, this fight symbolized a few things: that Carl Froch had a great jab, he had great heart, and was able to overcome adversity. And then we had the Lucien Boutte fight. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Lucien Boutte was being touted at the time as the next great super middleweight champion. He was champion, and people were touting him as the best in the division. Carl Froch was a big underdog, and Lucien Boutte was fast. He had that flexibility. He had a strong jab. He was a southpaw, so he jabbed from the right hand, and a lot of people were seeing him as the future. And spectacularly, Carl Froch went in there, and as they would say, he took the bull by the horns, and he absolutely destroyed Lucien Boutte. It was an impeccable performance. I believe it was a 5th round stoppage. He respectively obliterated him, and that was, I think, a fight that really cemented his career. And then, of course, we had the George Groves rematch. And in the first fight, George Groves scored a knockdown in round 1. Great knockdown, dominated for 6 rounds. But Carl Froch came back, showed character, showed courage, and got a controversial stoppage, I believe, in round 9. In the rematch, George Groves played some significant mind games that seemed to be very effective. But then in the first fight, George Groves used significant mind games that seemed to get under Carl Froch's skin. But I remember in the second fight, Carl Froch, I think, employed a sports psychologist. And this time it felt that Carl Froch was winning the mind games. And in the fight, it was a competitive fight. But in round 8, I believe it was a feint, short left hook, and straight right. And that was the end of the fight. It was a tremendous knockout. And as Carl Froch will remind everyone, it was done in front of 80,000 people at Wembley. But all jokes aside, it was another great night. And the good thing about Carl Froch's career is that he's had a lot of dancing partners, and I've always said great fighters have great dancing partners. Muhammad Ali is a good example. You had the Muhammad Ali Joe Frazier trilogy, 3 great fights. Muhammad Ali versus George Foreman. He's got these great dancing partners that define his career, and Carl Froch had multiple dancing partners that defined his career, and he's had even other great fights. You know, the author Abraham was at the time known as a formidable power puncher, and Carl Froch just dominated him behind the jab, and dominated him behind the jab and used a lot of combination punches and completely dominated the fight. Carl Froch had, he had those significant dancing partners, even if they weren't competitive fights. Lucien Boutte, it wasn't a competitive fight, but because of Lucien Boutte's reputation, he was able to, his reputation made it an event where you thought, oh, Carl Froch is probably not going to win this one. And he went in there and obliterated him. So he had different types of, dance partners. And of course, he had the loss to Andre Ward, who, is one of the greats. And he went 12 rounds with Andre Ward. So let's simply say Carl Froch's CV is of an elite standard. So that's Carl Froch's CV. But what about Darren Till? So Darren Till has a Muay Thai and kickboxing background. He was in the UFC, and to my understanding, he was a respectable title challenger that needs to be respected. He's fought at the high level of UFC, And he had notable wins against Stephen Thompson and Kelvin Gastelum. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. And he fought for the title against Tyrone Woodley. So we had, in the UFC, he was a world title contender. Now he's gone on into the Misfits, and he has, you got to remember, Misfits fights, to my knowledge, are not considered professional fights. I might be wrong about that, but that's my understanding. So he's had 3 Misfits boxing matches. The first one was against Anthony Taylor, who respectively he destroyed. And Anthony Taylor is a good fighter. He's at that point he had been busy. He had another good victory against Darren Stewart, who I believe had a UFC background. And then his last fight was against Luke Rockhold, and that was a sensational performance. So Darren Till has a different type of CV compared to Carl Froch. However, here's the disparity. Carl Froch, I believe, is 50 years old, and I think Darren Till is in his late 30s, and he's gaining some momentum. And also Darren Till is a southpaw, which adds an interesting element to the fight. Of course, if we had the Carl Froch of 10 years ago, this is not a fight. This is definitely not even a fight worth mentioning. But a 50-year-old Carl Froch, what does he have left? We know he wouldn't be able to fight at the world level, but in boxing there's different levels. There's British level, there's European level, there's world title challenger, there's world title level. There's different levels to this game. And we know that in his peak, he was a championship level fighter that could fight with the elite. He could hang with the best of them. We don't know what Darren Till's level is because it's hard to gauge what level his opposition is. So we can't ascertain if he's British level, European level, title challenger level, championship level. We can kind of take away the championship level, world title contender level. We can take away those levels, but where does he stand in the British level, European level? It's hard to ascertain on those performances where he stands. However, we shouldn't take away that his performances were electric, and it appears that he's in a very good boxing environment. So we got Darren Till on the ascendancy, and then we got Carl Froch, obviously in decline because he's older. But if this is one thing we can say, is that even though Carl Froch is clearly wouldn't be in fighting shape, why would he? Because he's not preparing for a fight. If you look at Carl Froch, you can see that he's clearly in good shape. He's maintained his fitness. But there's a difference between being in good shape and in fighting shape. So the question would be, could Carl Froch get into fighting shape? And could he even get to 60% of what he was? Because if he can, then if he maintains any of the punch resistance that he had, if he's retained that power and he has a proper camp, if he's at 60-70%, then Carl Froch would win this fight. There's another important variable here as well. Darren Till is a southpaw, and the question would be, how does Carl Froch do against southpaws? And the reference point is Lucien Boutte. Lucien Boutte was a world champion and touted to be the next best thing. And Carl Froch absolutely destroyed him. So based on that premise, the variable of the southpaw seems to go in Carl Froch's favor. So I guess what I'm saying is that in the heyday of his career, this wouldn't even be a matchup. But with Carl Froch's age and with Darren Till's momentum, then this can be interesting. Also, let's give Darren Till credit. He's very good at marketing fights. In the Tommy Fury press conference, because they didn't eventually have a fight, he promoted himself very well by acting very chaotic. And he's been doing a good job of promoting himself through the platform of Misfits. So this is interesting, and I'm not sure if Crawford really has a desire to fight Darren Till. Um, it looks like he's financially comfortable. He's made a lot of money from his fighting career. He's got a very good YouTube channel. He definitely understands the YouTube game. But who knows if Darren Till can keep building his momentum and keep building with regards to his media presentation. And if the money's on the table, then who knows?